Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank you, everyone present, for taking the time of joining us today. My name is Daniel Tapiaro, Climate Finance Advisory Consultant at South Pole in Mexico, and I will be behind the scenes moderating today's webinar. We'll wait for everyone to join us. I'll go through some housekeeping rules. So please, as attendees, you're all on mute at the moment. If you have any question or comments, please submit it through the question box on your control panel. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know, and we'll do our best to support you. We'll aim to answer questions on the presentation in the Q&A session at the end of our webinar. However, we do have a record number of registrants for today's climate chatter, so we might not be able to answer all of the questions that we've had. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you within the week, along with a link to download the presentation slides. Last but not least, many of us are broadcasting from our homes, so please bear with us in case of any technical hiccups, which we will do our best to resolve as soon as possible. The next one, please. Before we start, I'd like to provide a big overview of what South Pole is and what we do. So for those of you who do not know South Pole yet, we are a leading project developer and globally recognized advisor on climate action. We've been in the business of fighting climate change and developing results-based climate solutions from the get-go since our founding in 2006. Today, we have our boots on the ground in 18 global offices, and our team of 300 experts is working side by side with investors, the public sector, and companies to help them create value on their climate journey. And we've been doing this successfully for nearly 15 years now. Our solutions have helped reduce millions of tons of CO2 globally, help support the development of clean technologies we urgently need, safeguard precious ecosystems, and improve living and working conditions for countless people around the world. The next one, please. So to start off, and as a small introduction to the topic at hand today, we all know this decade is a crossroads on humanity's fight against climate change. We have an enormous opportunity to build a better world for all. Carbon policy and pricing plays a crucial role in our ambitions to curb global emissions and achieve the Paris Agreement's goals on limiting the increase of global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Given that we have had many registrations for this webinar, I believe many of you might have read in the news that carbon markets grew dramatically in 2019, by 34% to be exact. This is a record number. Now, some of you might be wondering why the carbon market grew so much. What does this mean for your business operations? And how can companies participate? Where does this interest come from? And in the current situation, how does COVID impact and will impact climate action for all? These questions and many more will be answered by our experts in today's webinar, which brings me to the next slide. I'm thrilled of having the opportunity to share our virtual floor with this experienced panel, formed by one distinguished guest representing the biggest telecommunications company in Latin America, América Móvil, and three of South Pole's top carbon pricing experts. Thus, I am delighted to briefly introduce each presenter for today. Our guest, Paula Garcia, who currently acts as América Móvil's Sustainability Manager, Mireille Meneses, our carbon pricing consultant, joining us all the way from London today. Thank you very much for being with us, regardless of time zones, Mireille. Miguel Chavarria, our one and only regional lead for Latin America, who is based in South Pole's Mexico City office. And last but never least, Victor Escalona, senior consultant for climate policy and carbon pricing, also based in our ever-reigning Mexico City. Now, enough of hearing from me. I'm sure that you all want to hear from our top experts. So I'll now be handing things over to Mireille, who will give you an overview of carbon pricing ambitions and trends in our region. The floor and microphone is yours, Mireille.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you so much for that introduction. I have to be honest, I'm not quite sure about the ever-reigning Mexico City since I'm based in London, so let's talk about that afterwards. So thank you all for joining. I would like to start my presentation by giving you an overview on the climate ambition in Latin America. So where are we now? We already know that the current climate pledges from all countries are insufficient and to meet the Paris Agreement temperature goal. With the business as usual scenario in which we are at the moment, we are heading to a 3.5-degree scenario. It's quite far from the 1.5 scenario that the Paris Agreement encourages to achieve. So what we are seeing in the map is the current long-term strategies, the announcements for towards net zero, or the updates in NDCs in the continent. As you can see, Costa Rica and Mexico are among the first Latin American countries with a long-term strategy submitted to the UNFCCC. Mexico was the first one actually who announced this long-term strategy back in 2016. Then recently we have the Cuba's and Chile NDC updated, and then last year during the COP in Madrid, we've heard a lot of announcements from different Latin American countries that were updating their NDCs. They were designing their long-term strategies, and that they're willing to put together a net zero goal. And it's likely that we are going to see much more about these countries next year during the COP in 2021. So far, what's on the space for net zero? We have seen, yes, countries in Latin America, but this is an effort that has been driven so far from European countries, from Asia as well, but not only at a country level, but also from a regional and city level. And as well, a lot of companies have come on board. We have right now around 768 businesses just willing to put together a net zero goal and to commit towards those targets. But so I would like to let you know, what does net zero is? What does it looks like? Can we please go to the next slide? So net zero, in a very simple and graphic way, the way you were saying this in the table, it's achieving net zero means that in order for us to stay within the 1.5 degrees threshold, emissions must start to fall drastically this decade. So the world can be effectively carbon neutral towards a mid-century point. What you are seeing, where you are seeing on the screen, is exactly that pathway towards net zero. So industries and a lot of companies play a crucial role in this transition towards net zero. There are many different ways in which we can achieve that. One of those measures is carbon offsets, whether they're part of a compliance scheme or a voluntary scheme. The preference, of course, if adopting offsets for achieving net zero, is that first and foremost, companies need to reduce their emissions, and they have to set ambitious targets for in clear decarbonization efforts that would be aligned, of course, with this 1.5 degree dictated by the science. And then as a second step, companies need to avoid. And as a third step, companies should start investing in removals to tackle all those unavoidable emissions. So in offsets in the voluntary carbon market could be an enabler for achieving net zero. So enabling net zero through voluntary carbon markets. Can we please go to the next slide? What are the trends actually in the voluntary carbon markets? Is that real? Yes, it's becoming real quite recently. We have seen in the voluntary carbon market space that since a lot of companies and countries have moved towards the design and adoption of net zero or long-term strategies, we have seen an increased attention within the voluntary carbon market from hard to abate sectors, from cement, iron, and steel, for example. We have also seen movement within the market by just being focusing more on carbon sequestration. This carbon sequestration could come in two different ways, from nature-based solutions or from carbon capture and storage, CCUS. But for enabling these solutions, government leadership is key. We have also seen as a major enabler, and it's something that it's gonna become increasingly important. It's price. We have seen price increases in the voluntary carbon market, and this is because in a net zero pathway, prices are likely to increase due to a combination of different factors, either from demand growth or just because corporates are just increasingly focusing on high quality credits. This offsets, of course, and the main reason why they're going to come pricey in the future, it's just because high quality credits should ensure permanence and additionality. And corporates are going to be focusing on that in the voluntary carbon market. And that brings me to my second point. So you've heard previously that I mentioned that there has been an increased attention in nature-based solutions as part of one of the carbon sequestration options. So what we are seeing on the screen is on your right side, you can see a chart. This was released in a report from Ecosystem Marketplace. I think it was this week in the margins of the New York Climate Week, in which they published the results of 2019 in the voluntary carbon market. We have seen an increased price for nature-based solutions credits, despite seeing a decrease in the volume of nature-based solutions compared to 2018. In 2019, of course, the volume was 30% less, but the price increased. And this is the result of the attention that now nature-based solutions are getting in the voluntary carbon market space. Many of these nature-based solutions projects, reforestation, improved forest management, conservation, agriculture, all of these projects have a great potential to be developed in Latin America and in the Caribbean. We believe that we will see a substantial amount of demand of nature-based solutions in the upcoming years just coming from Latin America, which leads to an important side note in my second slide. Can we please move forward? Which is carbon offsets and SDGs. How can carbon offsets help achieve SDG goals? And so carbon offsets are not just a transition catalyst, but are also a transportative impact. For example, what I was explaining before about nature-based solutions. These solutions can provide both mitigation and adaptation at the same time. These projects typically occur in poor communities, so this type of projects can provide a wide range of co-benefits, such as clean water. They can also improve education and ensure women empowerment. This is all about SDGs. Carbon offsetting is a wonderful transportive sustainable development goals. As I said, they have a huge impact on communities and of course in ecology. Engaged companies now, they are not just focusing on reducing emissions, but they are actually focusing on delivering impact. And we have seen increasingly in the last year. This is just because there is a link between carbon offsetting with delivering a meaningful CSR and investment program within corporates. So in summary, can we please move to the next one? So what's happening then with the voluntary carbon market? So to summarize, it's very simple. The market demand is growing globally. So we thought that due to COVID-19, we would have seen a decrease in that, but actually no. Climate leadership is real and more than ever. This growth has not only been this year, it has been occurring over the last few years. Of course, coronavirus impacted a lot of businesses and countries as well. But we at South Pole, we remain optimistic that, as I said, corporate leadership is here to stay. So current market demand comes from not only from large multinationals, but also from real asset owners. We see the interest in many new clients in the Latin American region. They are willing to understand the state of the carbon markets and how they can effectively integrate a successful net zero strategy. And of course, this corporates had a clear trend of commitment to permanent sequestration of carbon, while creating local impact where possible, and of course, achieving long-term offtake agreements. And I think the last point is that all these investments that we are seeing are also triggering investments in innovative technologies, CCUS. And this carbon sequestration focus that we're going to see in the coming years, it's mainly because now a lot of the buyers are focusing on getting permanent credits, which means that can ensure permanence of those emission reductions. That could be also a challenge in some cases, but we are certain that with the current methodologies, we can tackle that. That's it. Hope you find this update useful. And now I pass to my esteemed colleague, Danielle.
Thank you very much, Mireille, for this wonderful delivered overview of the trends on carbon markets. I really appreciate it, and I think we've learned a lot. But there's more to come. I will hand over now to Victor Escalona, who will explain the topic of carbon pricing in our region, why it's important, and the policies being implemented by countries in the region. So, Victor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you to Mireille for such a comprehensive overview of what's going on. Good morning from Mexico. I'm Victor Escalona, and I basically do advisory on carbon pricing globally, but with a strong focus in Latin America. So it's great to be here with you all. So we already heard from Mireille how carbon markets and carbon offsetting has been growing for quite some time. In the past few years, the demand for carbon offsets in particular has dramatically risen, with the world's leading offset standard, Verra, for example, reporting a doubling of new issuance in 2018. And we expect the same trend for this year. We show you here in this slide some of the major credit buyers that are working currently with us. But of course, voluntary carbon offsetting from the private sector is not the only driver of this demand increase. New carbon pricing regulations also have a role to play. Next one, please. This map shows you the developments in carbon pricing across the Latin American region. There is actually a lot to talk about. So to start, let's do it with Mexico, where the government has recently launched early this year a pilot for a national emissions trading system, which covers more than 270 million tons of CO2. And it also allows offsets for compliance under this system, though we're still waiting for the specific regulation regarding the offset program. And also Mexico is one of the countries that has a carbon tax in place since 2014. So it's the only country in Latin America implementing both currently. Colombia, on the other side, they also have a carbon tax in place, and it's the only one currently in Latin America that effectively allow the use of offsets. And effectively is because they're actually using an offset program to offset emissions in this instrument. Chile and Argentina also have carbon taxes with similar prices, around $5 a ton, but they do not allow for the use of offsets as of yet. In addition, next slide, please. Brazil is currently considering the implementation of market instruments to meet their mitigation targets and reduce overall mitigation costs. This includes assessing different carbon pricing instruments, including an ETS and a carbon tax. And Colombia and Chile are also considering the use of an ETS, either as a complementary or as a replacement measure to their current carbon taxes. Next one, please. So in summary, what's happening? This slide gives you more detail of the recent developments in Latin America. We see here that the majority of the initiatives are no older than 3 years since they started implementation. And regarding instruments under consideration, ETS is the leading instrument being considered. Colombia is a little bit ahead because they already have a climate bill since 2018 that is allowing for the adoption of an ETS. And right now, there is a drafting of the regulation and the design of the instrument. This is just high-level information, but I encourage you to contact us after the webinar to learn more of what's going on in Latin America. Next one, please. So we go back to demand and forecast for growing. This slide illustrates how offsets will increasingly be in demand from various carbon markets. We anticipate close to a 30% increase in demand, and this figure does not include China, which will be also a potential growing demand for offsets. Many of the demand will come from international carbon markets, however, such as CORSIA, and for the Paris Agreement through Article 6 implementation, which is the topic of my next slide. What is CORSIA? Well, CORSIA is a sectoral international market focusing on international aviation. It aims to achieve carbon neutral growth for international aviation from 2021 onwards, and is regulated by ICAO. This carbon neutrality will be achieved by airlines buying eligible carbon offsets and increasing their use of sustainable aviation fuels. Because of COVID, we do not know what the demand will be, but more than 6 countries in Latin America have already opted into the first voluntary phase that starts in 2021. This means, for example, that a route from San Jose, Costa Rica to Mexico City, for example, will have to offset its emission from next year onwards. And we have a mandatory phase that will start in 2027. Next one, please. Regarding Paris Agreement and carbon markets, I guess many of you have already heard about Article 6, which offers a path to significantly raise climate ambition and lowering cost. And it aims also by engaging the private sector and spreading finance, technology, and expertise into new areas. Its main objective is to facilitate cooperation and serve as the flexibility tool to achieve NDCs. And it will do it by establishing 3 separate mechanisms for cooperation. 2 are based on markets, Article 6.2 and 6.4, and a third one, Article 6.8, is a non-market approach. 6.2 refers to a bilateral cooperative approach. Basically, it's 2 parties engaging together and cooperating. And 6.4 is based on a new market, the Sustainable Development Mechanism, which in theory could be the replacement of the Clean Development Mechanism from the Kyoto Protocol. This is so far what the Paris Agreement says, but we need a rule book to actually be able to implement. And the rulebook is not yet finalized. Negotiation continues through bilateral and multilateral processes, and we hope that final rules can be adopted next year in Glasgow at the next COP. It should happen this year, but it was delayed due to COVID. And why it has taken so long? Because there are many political and technical issues, of course. Some of them, I mentioned them here. One is the use of older compliance instruments for NDC compliance. And the other one is relatively more recent, which is what would happen with voluntary credits, voluntary markets, and corresponding adjustments. If this happens, governments will have the challenge to specify whether their mitigation activities are within or outside the scope of their own NDC, and they will have to commit not to claim those emission reductions from voluntary markets in their national inventory. So this poses a big challenge and also is a very important issue still unresolved. Next one, please. However, even though we don't have a rule book yet, Article 6 pilots and international cooperation is not stopping, is advancing. Projects are being currently implemented. Some parties are using the latest Article 6.2 text as guidance for the implementation of pilots. And we are already starting to see some pilot projects emerging in Latin America. South Pole, for example, worked on 2 virtual pilots in Colombia, which I will give you a little more detail in the next slide. First of all, a virtual pilot is a blueprint of what a mitigation activity or a project could look like in the real world. The assessment of virtual pilots help us and has shown us what the Article 6 rulebook should solve, which is, for example, NDC achievement risk, institutional frameworks between both buyer and host country, corresponding adjustments, governance arrangements. And one key message that we conclude from this study is that we really need a strong rule book because this is crucial for engagement. We analyzed 2 activities in Colombia. One of them is the use of biogas from industrial wastewater treatment, and the other one is solar PV. And these are very interesting activities because none of them are currently mentioned in Colombia's NDC. So one could argue that both of these activities are outside the scope, even though Colombia, for example, has committed to increase renewable energy development, but it's not specific on solar PV, for example. So this is something that this activity or this study tried to analyze. Next slide, please. So we learned that virtual pilots and pilots are opportunities for the private sector as well. In this slide, we showed you how carbon markets help address carbon emissions and achieve corporate climate goals. Basically, to redirect the flow of global finance into climate activities, the private sector must clearly understand the opportunities open to them. When corporates fully understand how they can use this fast-growing mechanism for international cooperation, they will be able to source public finance and become partners for projects and add business values, which will bring significantly gains towards addressing international mitigation targets. Next slide, please. And we show you just here some examples of leading corporate action, some big announcements from big companies that are already adopting targets and are already engaging in carbon markets internationally. And just to summarize my presentation, these are the main takeaways. We see that carbon pricing is tremendously growing in the region. We learned that CORSIA, even though 2020 is a tough year and the baseline will be reset, major international airlines will be demanding CORSIA credits in coming years. As well, Article 6 is the foundation of a new carbon market, and Asia and Latin America are leading the way. More transactions are expected in the coming years. For COVID implication, we are already seeing that considerable delays to carbon pricing instrument implementation, but signs tell us that we cannot go back. We need to keep advancing. But on voluntary corporate action, offsetting is no longer an exercise for European companies. Net zero matters to our shareholders, regardless of location. And we expect also higher future prices. Low prices as we are seeing them because of CDM and in voluntary markets will not last. Definitely this next decade will be an era of higher prices in the carbon. And now I give the word back to Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. I'm sure all of us appreciated your very detailed and concise explanation of the different carbon pricing policies being implemented by not only different Latin American countries, but in the region as a whole, and the opportunities that this could deliver for corporates. So I will now transition over to Miguel Chavarria, who will let us know the great opportunities that corporate strategies in the context of carbon policies could deliver for a green recovery and build back better for all humanity. So Miguel Chavarria, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and also thank you, Mireille and Victor, for sharing all of this really useful information. Also, thank you for the team for inviting me to taking part in this really nice conversation, and also to all the attendees lending us a little bit of their time and joining us today. Well, as a small recap, as mentioned before by Mireille, current international pledges are still insufficient to meet the Paris Agreement temperature goal. And as indicated by Victor, different price signals are being put on carbon in order to foster the global action. So in order to give a little bit more of context on the size of the challenge, and also to bring some numbers to the conversation, I think it's, of course, some up to this point common knowledge to all of us present in this conversation that the rise in global CO2 concentration since 2000 is about 2 parts per million per year, which is up to 10 times faster than any CO2 rate during the past 800,000 years. So that's really impressive. Moreover, if we want to raise the likelihood of keeping the global temperature increase below 1.5 degrees centigrade in comparison to pre-industrial levels, we should remain below 430 parts per million, and we're already around 414 parts per million. Also, using a global mean surface air temperature, the estimated remaining carbon budget will be of around 420 gigatons of CO2 equivalent, for a 66% probability of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade. And of course, we are emitting every year around 50 gigatons of CO2. So mathematically, if we do nothing, it's a virtual certainty that we will exceed the 1.5 degrees ambition. Of course, I'm talking about this like not meeting the ambition, but rather exceeding the current budget, which are, of course, not good news. And just to give another reference, according to the natural climate change during the current COVID-19 pandemic, global CO2 emissions decreased around 17% in April in comparison to mean 2019 levels. However, this dramatic change was forced by certainly dramatic circumstances and are likely to be temporary, as they do not reflect any profound structural changes. So again, this is just to give a little bit of the overview on the current situation. So can we please move to the next one? Thank you very much. So the reason why I start by highlighting the size of the challenge ahead is because, as we all know by now, just half of a degree of change can produce an important heightened impact on the environment. Just to provide a couple of examples, the population exposed to extreme temperatures at least once every 5 years could increase by threefold. Also, the area of ecosystems changing into a new composition of plants and animals is expected to almost double. These are certainly bad news, taking into consideration that these impacts will rapidly affect the world we live in, but also what we eat, what we breathe, what we drink, and basically the way we experience the world right now. One simple example on how climate change has increased the vulnerability of humankind to diseases is that a larger part of populations are being now affected by mosquito-borne diseases, such as malaria, dengue, and others, in comparison to what used to happen in the past. Just to give you a couple of extra ideas, if food availability decreases in our search for new sources of nutrients, new diseases could appear. Also, thinking on a much simpler scenario, pushing species out of their natural habitats can bring them to a closer and more frequent coexistence with people, which could potentially increase the likelihood of having more episodes like COVID-19. Next one, please. It is also important to be aware that global pandemic could push as much as 500 million people into poverty this very year. This means around 8% of total human population. Also, nearly 60% of women work in the informal economy, which puts them at a greater risk of falling into poverty. With regard to water, COVID-19 has made perfectly clear how important this is for sanitation and hygiene in order to prevent and contain disease outbreaks. So despite all said, and despite starting with all of this shock of reality, the current situation also represents an unprecedented opportunity for us to boost a green recovery. Can you please go back to the last one just for a couple of seconds more? Yeah, that's the one. Thank you very much. So first, recovery measures will need to address job creation, both directly and indirectly, but this can be done prioritizing critical activities for green recovery, such as renewable energy, energy efficiency, ecosystem restoration, organic agriculture. Promoting new ways of doing tourism, consumption, production, commuting, education, and training will help us to make the structural changes we need to increase the possibility of meeting global climate ambition and of course, humankind existence. Now, can we please move to the next one? Now more than ever, just like Mireille was saying in the beginning, companies are heavily invested in pushing boundaries and increasing their ambition. One proof of this is that the Science Based Targets initiative, and I'm super happy to say this, is close to reaching the 1,000 committed companies milestone, which I believe should be announced in the coming days or possibly a couple of weeks, which seemed in the past 5 years something like impossible, but when it all started, but now I think that they have done a really great work, and now reaching this milestone is awesome. And congrats to the Science Based Targets initiative, also to all of those companies now committed to this initiative. And the targets that we see now in corporates are adopting 1.5 to 2 degrees aligned climate targets, also net zero emission targets, and also climate positive targets. And although the understanding of what all these types of targets is still ongoing and being developed, and therefore, at least for the time being, this means that one type of target does not mean precisely the exact same thing for all the companies, making the claim of having one particular target. We have no time to waste. I think we all agree on that. Nonetheless, regardless the size of the company or the sector it's involving, the three main tools that exist right now are abatement, neutralization, and compensation of emissions. This means that companies need first to do all they can to unbundle their economic growth from an increase in their emissions, promote activities that allow removing and storing carbon from the environment, and going beyond their boundaries of their operations, fostering more GHG emission reduction activities. And here's where all what has been said before about carbon offsets and also climate finance becomes super important. The next one, please. Taking into consideration everything mentioned before, in our experience, companies are following what we conceived as the journey to climate leadership, which is what you can see in your screens right now, which comprises the understanding of the company's starting point in terms of carbon and also exposure to climate risks. I mean, many of you should have heard already or taken part of CDP or TCFD recommendations adoption. So that's one of the things. Also, defining a target and a strategy to meet such ambition, executing the plan that was foreseen by the company, going beyond the company's boundaries, as I was saying before, through collaborative approaches, and communicating transparently and effectively the company's performance. So this series of steps is not for sure linear, and this is something that can be rather tackled in parallel by companies, but this of course is subject to the organization context, goals, and resources available. So I mean, these are my 2 cents for the time being, and I'll remain attentive to your comments and questions should you have one for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Extraordinarily presented, and thanks a lot for reminding us of the importance to curb emissions and to think of no other way to build back better than with a green recovery. And now I will give the floor to our most distinguished guest, Paola Garcia, who will deliver on the importance of building corporate resiliency in a post-COVID era. Paola Garcia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I want to thank also all the team in South Pole for inviting me today. Well, sustainability has become an increasingly relevant topic for our company in terms of planning and operations. We have been doing a lot of efforts in the past, perhaps not always with a sustainability tag on them, but mainly looking for efficiency, modernization, cost reduction purposes. The thing is that recently, our main stakeholders, clients and investors, have become more interested on these topics. Can we change slide, please? Thank you. So, as I was telling you, our stakeholders have become more interested on our corporate governance, our risk management practices, our environmental performance, and our social impacts for two big reasons. And that is that it has been proven that companies that invest in improving their ESG indicators are more profitable, but also they are more resilient. Let's say that they are kind of like a safe bet. I think that most of you may be familiar with the approach that some organizations are taking, perhaps BlackRock, regarding the climate change and ESG indicators. So, you know, also given the fact that the new generations are more interested in the company's impacts, in ethical impacts and environmental impacts, our consumer base has been evolving. So we are seeing right now more environmentally and ethically driven purchases. And also what we think is that all the companies that wish to survive in the following decades must accordingly and disclose performance indicators on these matters, not only regarding the topic of our consumer base, but also think that these responsible generations will soon become a greater part of the employment base. And therefore, we will be recruiting them, we will be facing them in decision-making positions in our clients' offices, or in our investors' offices, or in our regulators' offices. So therefore, this is a great moment to start paying attention to material ESG issues, not only for reputational reasons, but also for achieving efficiencies and greater competitiveness. So we can move to the next slide, please. Our industry, the telecommunications industry, has been working for a couple of years now with the GSMA on what we have called the enablement effect. And that is how can the telecommunications industry help other industries to become more sustainable, and especially how to avoid emissions through technology and connectivity. So according to GSMA studies, what we have seen is that there are several areas in which we can have the possibility to avoid emissions using smart solutions. The main ones are, you can see them there, smart working, smart living, transportation and commuting, smart manufacturing, solutions for smart building, energy solutions, and also you have smart agriculture. So what we have seen is that we have realized that our contribution to tackle climate change through the enablement effect is perhaps greater than our environmental impact. In 2018, the whole telecommunications the company's emissions were approximately 220 million tons, which is about it's about 0.4% of what we can help avoid. let's say that the impact that the mobile telecommunications sector can have is around 2 billion tons of CO2 equivalents. That is similar to the emissions generated, let's say, by Russia in 2017. So really the total emissions that the mobile sector has in comparison to what we can help decrease is just like 0.4%. So if we can change to the next slide, the adoption of these solutions has been somehow slow, at least in Latin America. Last year, for the 1.5 billion connections that we had worldwide, Latin America had only like accounted for 3 or 4%. However, what we're seeing is that the current pandemic has forced every company to become more resilient, and it has accelerated the digital transformation of business. And it has transformed everything from how our employees work to how our customers communicate and how they consume products. So if we want to help sustain this decrease that Miguel was talking about previously on how during COVID our emissions were reduced, well, this is certainly a way in which we can start making things differently. So right now, the challenge that we face as a telecommunications company is to make sure that while helping others to avoid emissions, we do so in the most environmentally friendly way. And can we move please to the next slide? So right now, América Móvil is making strong commitments on cutting emissions towards 2030, not only in our operation, but also in our value chain. We have been looking into, of course, less intensive energy sources, renewable energy, switching from refrigerants to alternative cooling sources, energy efficiency, and also working along with our value chain to help us reduce our overall footprint. And we're doing so because we believe that now more than ever, sustainability has become a great tool for our company to become resilient and to recover better. So what we are saying right now is that we have a great opportunity, not only as a company, but also in our industry and in any industry after COVID. And that is that if we continue investing in renewables, if we continue relying on technology and environmentally friendly solutions that can make us more resilient and also cutting costs and driving efficiencies, at the same time we can have also a positive impact on the planet. So I think that would be it for me today. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Paula, and thank you very much for all of our attendees for taking the time to join us today, and of course to our expert speakers from Sao Paulo as well. So just to wrap up this whole information that we've just received from our experts, we can deduce then that carbon markets are steadily growing in the Latin American region. There are several instruments at play trying to curb down emissions. We've learned from Victor that CORSIA will be a major instrument, even with the current COVID challenges. There are several ETS under implementation or scheduled to be implemented in the region that could certainly help to abate emissions in our countries. And in Article 6, Latin America is leading the way along with APAC on the transactions done. Mireille has shown us a great exposure to the net zero capabilities and how these can tie to the voluntary carbon market and as well to other carbon markets. And Miguel showed us extraordinarily how there is a dire need to curb down emissions so we can build back better, and of course we can save our planet for our future generations to come. And finally, we also saw that corporate leadership is essential to help the world achieve a sustainable world, while also protecting their investments and assets from the ever-growing effects of climate change, helping them strengthen their climate journey with all humanity. So now we will go ahead and go through a Q&A session. We will wait for the questions to come through the chat. If you're interested in asking our experts one question that you would like answered, please go ahead and put it on chat. For me, I would like to start off, and because I'm interested in how corporates can lead the way, and I would like to ask Paula a specific question on, if you allow me, Paula, on what have been the major challenges for América Móvil to adopt a climate strategy, and how can businesses in Latin America focus on return of investment through these strategies, and specifically how did América Móvil make the decision to adopt these targets?
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I think that the biggest challenge that we face right now is that América Móvil has presence in 25 countries. So it's a very, very big company, and making sure that everyone measures and everyone is looking at the same indicators and is reporting the same information has been a challenge. We have been working for the past few years in harmonizing how every single subsidiary reports the information. So aligning everyone when you have when you are in a big country is definitely a great challenge. I think that also how was it that we decided to move forward? I think that it is something that you kind of see in the strategy. You realize that, as I was saying, if you want consumers to keep loving your brands, and if you want the investors to keep investing and to keep interested in your company, and if you want to be competitive, you need to step forward and to take these kind of decisions. And I think that also something that has made it really, really easy was that we have the support also from the global industry, the GSMA, that is kind of like the industry association worldwide. I think they made it really easy for us when working in guidelines with the Science-Based Targets Initiative, for example, on how the companies can commit and what is the path that they need to follow. There were, of course, some indicators that were more or less the same for all the companies in the industry. So working together with our peers and with this organization has also helped a lot in the process of defining how to get to the target definition.
Yes, very interesting, Paula. Thank you very much. No, definitely. I mean, I think it's very important that corporates lead the way, and you're showing that at least in our region, América Móvil is starting to become a very big actor and a leader to push companies towards this sustainable path you're following. Thank you very much, Paula. So I would like to go ahead and ask another question to our panelists for today. Maybe this is for Victor. So assuming that other countries adopt an ETS, an emissions trading system, similar to Mexico, could you expect some kind of integration to occur? For example, Mexico is part of the Pacific Alliance, as an example. We know, and we've saw on the presentation that other markets in the Pacific Alliance, such as Chile, are starting to adopt these systems as well. So what challenges could this bring, and what benefits could we expect from this possible integration with a specific economic alliance?
Thank you, Daniel. It's a very interesting question. I mean, you already mentioned the Pacific Alliance, which Mexico, Colombia, and Chile are members. And Mexico with an implementation of the ETS this year, and Colombia and Chile considering the adoption of similar, it is feasible. It is feasible for them to integrate somehow. It could be through linking. It could be through a full linking, for example, like the one California and Quebec have in North America, or it could be only for the use of offsets, for example, linked also with Article 6.2 for bilateral agreements, something like that. Linking the ETS systems of these three countries, for example, would have many benefits. The main is that the market is larger, it's more liquid, reduces overall compliance cost, promotes market stability, and reduces the carbon leakage. This export of emissions that sometimes is a risk and the loss of competitiveness for the company. So linking puts the same price across, would put the same price across the region, and that would provide more certainty to participants. Challenges to make this happen would be more political than technical, actually.
Thank you very much, Victor. Very interesting, and yeah, definitely the political challenges will be quite different. And last, this is a question that came in, and one of our attendees asked when they registered, and this might be for Mireille and Miguel. So we just learned that China has committed to be carbon neutral by 2060. So do you think this announcement could bring more Latin American countries to adopt similar targets? And what impacts could this bring to the private sector? Do you see any affectations?
Yeah, just my 2 cents again on this. I think this is based on a global movement, right? I mean, China is reacting to what everyone else has been committing to. And now, of course, for the corporate sector, this only means that a reassurance that this type of targets that we discussed before, 1.5 2 degrees align. Also, I mean, this is a priority for them and for many of their stakeholder groups. So this is I mean, this is there's no other alternative. We have to tackle this now, since we only have, as I was saying before, the numbers are quite rude. Based on saying that we only have less than 10 years in order to meet that target, if not, and to avoid facing the worst of the consequences of climate change. But I will leave it there. Mireille, please.
Thank you, Miguel. So I think the quick answer to that is, are we going to see a more active Latin American countries in the coming years? We have to. And this is not only in the interest of reducing emissions, this is more a matter of green recovery, as Miguel mentioned before. So when we decide these carbon neutral commitments or long-term strategies, of course, these have to be designed with a socioeconomic vision that will bring substantial economic and development opportunities in Latin America and the Caribbean. But most importantly, it's just because the world is moving so fast. We have already seen an increase in emission in the European Union. We have seen that in China. And with that, it's likely that a lot of the stringent economic policies will come afterwards, and possibly trade measures that will eventually impact companies. And it could be positive or negative ways. It depends on the support and the leadership that we get from countries. That's the crucial part.
Definitely, Mireille. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Miguel, as well, Victor, Paula, and thank you all for joining us today. I know we've had several other questions on the chat. Fortunately, we are out of time. We just have 1 minute left. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank our viewers, and I want to thank our panelists as well for this very interesting webinar. And we'd just like to tell you of our upcoming climate chatters. We have the Path to Net Zero on the 24th of September. Innovate for Climate, how to raise ambition through carbon offsetting. And finally, for the City Finance Lab, where I will be delighted to present you the City Finance Lab on financing the green transitions of city on the 21st of October. So we expect you there as well. We expect you on all other climate chatters, and please follow us through social media and feel free to get in touch with us. Here are our contacts. And well, again, nothing else to add, but to thank again everyone for joining us, giving us your time, and allowing us entering your homes through this platform. So thank you very much again, and I hope you all have a wonderful day, and please take care.
Thank you.